Hello, I'm Sandy Gard. I'm inspired to share this material as boundaries are a common topic in the addiction recovery groups that I facilitate. I invite you to check out my services at ggirllifestyle.com. So today is part 2 of the Setting Boundaries course. This is scientifically based material that I'm sharing, and the resources will be listed at the end of this video. Thanks for joining me. Here we go. So part 2, we're looking at where boundaries come from. Exploring where our boundaries come from is an important part of creating healthy ones. Our boundaries begin their development in childhood and are heavily influenced by our experiences in the first years of our lives. Let's take a tour through a few places that may have given rise to the boundaries you know and maybe don't love today. Childhood is a time of immense learning. Much of our personality and behavioral tendencies begin in childhood as we learn to navigate through our environment. A few critical aspects of boundary development include exploration, observation, and messaging. Exploration. We start to develop our identity and differentiate ourselves from our parents as toddlers. In this stage of our development, it's critical that we're allowed to explore our surroundings independently of our parents to develop a healthy sense of self. If we are not given opportunities to explore and learn about our environments for ourselves, we are not able to begin building our identities at this critical stage. Whitfield suggests that children are often not allowed to explore independently when parents have been wounded in their own childhood. Specifically, he states when parents have not healed their own wounds, their children will be wounded in approximate proportion to the extent that the parents are wounded. Developing our identities early on is an important part of developing healthy boundaries. Without a sense of self, we are more likely to become codependent and have low self-esteem. Low self-esteem and codependent tendencies both prohibit our development of healthy boundaries. Observation. As children, much of our behaviors and beliefs are shaped by what we see others doing. The extent to which children will imitate adults is evidenced by the famous Bobo doll experiment. In that experiment, 3 groups of children observed an adult playing with a giant inflatable doll, which was called a Bobo doll. Group 1 observed the adult playing aggressively with the doll. Group 2 observed the adult playing gently with the doll. Group 3 did not watch the adult play with the doll. The children who watched an aggressive interaction between the adult and the Bobo doll were significantly more aggressive with it when it was their turn to play than the other 2. This demonstrates the effect that simple observation can have on behavior. If we observe our parents and caregivers expressing poor boundaries, we will likely imitate their behavior and develop poor boundaries ourselves. Messaging. Growing up in a family with poor boundaries can send us negative messages, which we then internalize and learn to expect from everyone else as we grow older. For example, when parents violate our private spaces by barging through closed doors or reading diaries, we learn that it's normal for people to infringe on us. This sends the message either that we do not deserve safe spaces, leading to an inability to say no, which is porous boundaries, or that we need to defend ourselves, leading to the exclusion of intimacy, which refers to rigid boundaries. Parents with unhealthy boundaries may have the tendency to encourage their children to suppress their emotions. For example, they may say, "Stop crying," or "Oh, please," accompanied by some dismissive gesture like an eye roll. This behavior teaches us that some emotions are not okay to feel and that we should ignore them, which leads to an inner world that feels obscured or confusing in adulthood. There are many categories of childhood experiences that influence our boundary development. Exploration, observation, and messaging are just a few. Reflecting on impactful events or the behavioral patterns of your caregivers during your childhood may be helpful in determining where your boundaries come from and what wounds you may need to heal to develop healthy boundaries. Exercise. Dear younger self, consider, in as much depth as you're comfortable with, the behaviors you observed in early childhood and how they influence your life today. Did your parents or caregivers give healthy boundaries or have healthy boundaries? Were there particular events that you feel were important in shaping your current boundaries? When you're done reflecting, answer the following question. What messages would you want to share with your younger self if you could? Attachment style. Attachment style. When we are infants, we are completely dependent on our parents for our survival. We need food, water, and a clean diaper, of course, but we also need love and connection. When these needs are met, we are taught that we are safe and loved. However, when they are not met, or they are met unreliably, we learn that we are unsafe and develop coping mechanisms to try to compensate. These early experiences are what give rise to what's known as our attachment style. Attachment style is essentially the way in which you relate to others. It's a template that shapes our self-concept and our ability to trust others. Also, the strategies we use to manage our emotions and how much of our true selves we are willing to share with others. Understanding your attachment style and how it developed can help you understand where your boundaries come from and how you might go about making adjustments. There are generally thought to be three categories of attachment style: secure, anxious, and avoidant. Let's talk in more depth about each. Secure. A secure attachment style comes from having your needs consistently met as a child. Loving and generous parents or caregivers teach children that they are lovable, their needs are important, and relationships are safe and dependable. This general sense of security with themselves and others makes setting and maintaining boundaries easier. Anxious. An anxious attachment style is characterized by insecurity, fear of rejection or abandonment, and codependent tendencies. This type of attachment style develops when your needs were inconsistently met as a child. For example, if your parents fluctuated between being crushingly attentive and detached, prioritized their needs at the expense of yours, pushed you away as punishment, or made you feel responsible for their volatile feelings, you would likely develop an anxious attachment style. Avoidant. An avoidant attachment style generally manifests as difficulty in building and maintaining long-term relationships due to the fear of letting others get too close. This attachment style usually develops when caregivers are absent or emotionally indifferent. People with an avoidant attachment style often experience being left to fend for themselves, being criticized for their dependence on their caregiver, and being rejected when expressing their needs or feelings. Because our attachment styles influence our ability and willingness to communicate with others, they have a substantial impact on our boundaries. For example, people with an anxious or avoidant attachment style will have a harder time setting boundaries due to the fear of conflict and rejection, or they may be unable to recognize what their needs and desires are. Exercise. How do you relate? You will be given 3 lists of statements that correspond to each attachment style. Note each statement you feel describes you and which category it belongs to. When you're done, count how many statements you agree with in each category. Whichever category has the most is the attachment style you are most likely aligned with. So here we go on the next page. Anxious, avoidant, and secure. So there's 5 statements for each category. So as you listen to them, decide whether you think that resonates with you or not, and whichever category you have the most statements that you resonate with may indicate which attachment style relates to you and your life. So under the anxious, 5 statements. I think a lot about my relationships. I am very sensitive to my partner's moods. I worry that I won't measure up to other people. I tend to get attached to romantic partners very quickly. When I'm not in a relationship, I feel incomplete. 5 statements for avoidant. I can easily put people out of my mind. I find it difficult to provide emotional support. I value my independence more than relationships. I find it difficult to depend on others. Finally, it makes me uncomfortable when people want to get close to me. And statements related to secure attachment. I find it easy to be affectionate. I feel comfortable depending on others. I find it easy to express my wants and needs. I am generally satisfied with my romantic relationships. Finally, I believe most people are essentially honest and dependable. Core beliefs. Our picture of the fundamental reality of who we are is comprised of our core beliefs. Our core beliefs might be that we are special and lovable, or we might believe that we are unimportant or deficient in some manner. Core beliefs are an instrumental part of setting boundaries because they dictate our self-esteem and whether or not we feel we are worthy of boundaries. Like attachment style, development of our core beliefs begins in childhood and is based on how we are treated by those around us. For example, if our friends and family were supportive and encouraging when we were children, we may have the core belief that we are a capable, competent person. Alternatively, if we were bullied at school, we may have the core belief that we are an outcast or that we are unlikable. The effect of victimization by peers, family, or other authority figures has been shown scientifically to influence our core beliefs. The beliefs we develop early in our lives have also been shown to stick around into adulthood. Feelings of shame, defectiveness, vulnerability, incompetence, and self-sacrifice have been shown to relate to negative core beliefs in a large sample of adults. Core beliefs about these feelings are particularly damaging because they diminish our self-esteem and our ability to set boundaries. Boundaries depend on a positive self-image and the conviction that our needs are valuable. When we set boundaries, we will likely get pushback or another kind of negative response. To hold our ground and maintain our boundaries when we are challenged, we need to truly believe in ourselves. If we don't hold a core belief that our feelings and needs are valid, others will have a much easier time persuading us to abandon our boundaries and keep acting in a way that prioritizes them over us. Exercise. What's at your core? In this exercise, we will examine some of the core beliefs we currently hold. Take a moment to reflect on your self-image and consider what your fundamental beliefs are about yourself and write them down on a piece of paper. Selecting one core belief at a time, try to think of where it came from, why you've held on to it, and if it's something you would like to keep or work toward discarding. Getting familiar with what your core beliefs are and how they came to be will be helpful as you move forward with your journey toward building healthy boundaries. Identity. Identity is at the core of the boundaries we set. We have to know who we are to know what boundaries are needed. Identity can be described as a feeling that you are a coherent, continuous, and distinct person who is physically and mentally capable of running your own life. Identity is our definition of ourselves, the me in I am me. Our identity is entirely our own to create. We decide what our morals and values are, who we want to connect with, what goals we want to pursue, and more generally, what we want from our experience as a human. Having a strong sense of identity is associated with higher self-esteem and a greater sense of control over your life, which makes setting boundaries easier. Our identities change over time and with experience. For example, there are likely many aspects of your identity 10 years ago that are not part of your current identity. Trauma and grief can also disrupt our identities, leaving us uncertain of who we are. Lacking a clear sense of self can damage our self-esteem, our sense of autonomy, and our emotional stability. All of these consequences in turn make setting boundaries much more challenging. Codependence is another context in which our sense of self is disrupted. It has been described as a disease of lost selfhood. Codependence refers to a dysfunctional way of relating to others in which you deprioritize yourself and abandon healthy boundaries to prevent conflict. Example, a codependent person might make excuses for their partner's mistreatment of them rather than address the issue. Even though they are hurt by their partner's behavior, they would rather manage internal conflict than external conflict. So they find a way to excuse it. Choosing to deal with the hurt over dealing with the problem, we are, in a sense, betraying ourselves. When we dismiss our own needs in favor of the needs of others, we are telling ourselves that we can't be trusted to have our own back. This kind of betrayal demands that we fracture our identity to some extent so that we can tuck it away someplace where it won't cause problems, which continues a cycle of unhealthy boundaries and loss of self. Fortunately, this cycle can be broken by regaining contact with our true self and setting some protective boundaries. One way to begin to reconnect with yourself and identify your needs is through the practice of self-awareness. Self-awareness. One of the first conditions that must be met before you can start setting boundaries is an awareness of what your needs are. Self-awareness involves an awareness of your own internal state of mind and resources, as well as an awareness of how your behaviors impact those around you. We require self-awareness to identify what we are feeling and why. For example, we may not be aware that our friend's constant barrage of text messages is violating a boundary of ours until we recognize that receiving messages from them makes us feel overwhelmed or resentful. By identifying these feelings and their source, we can build a clear picture of the specific boundary we need to set in this situation. The more aware you are of your internal cues, the better able you will be to identify and communicate your needs to others. We are often not fully conscious of our internal experiences because we've learned to numb or ignore them. This is especially true if we were raised to believe that some feelings are inappropriate and we shouldn't acknowledge them, as described earlier. Our general state of constant stimulation and information overload can distract us and impede our ability to tune in to what we're feeling. With practice and intention, we can learn to reconnect with ourselves and better understand the messages our bodies are sending us. Summary for Module 2. The boundaries we hold today are a product of our childhood experiences, attachment style, core beliefs, identity, and the extent of our self-awareness. As children, the development of our boundaries is primarily the product of our relationship with our caregivers and the ways in which we see others behave. So there's a great number of resources where I source this material from. stay tuned for part 3, which should be posted in a few days. There are five modules altogether. I really appreciate you joining me. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Thank you so much.